I'm Madison Campbell, 31 years old, founder of Stellar Tech Solutions. My company just hit a $20 million valuation, but my family still thinks I'm playing business. When Dad texted about an urgent family meeting, my stomach dropped. Little did I know, they were gathering to stage an intervention for my supposedly failing business. The Forbes recognition sitting in my inbox would change everything. Before I tell you how my family's well-intentioned intervention backfired spectacularly, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want more stories of business triumph against all odds. Growing up in suburban Boston, I was the odd one out in my traditional family. My father, Robert, was a successful investment banker who worked for the same firm for 30 years. He valued stability above all else, frequently telling us at dinner, security isn't exciting, but it pays the mortgage. My mother, Catherine, a former elementary school teacher, had given up her career to become a full-time homemaker when my older sister Heather was born. Academically, I always excelled. Straight A's academic decathlon medals, science fair awards, my bedroom walls were covered with achievements. But somehow, it was never quite enough. Heather was the perfect daughter. She followed our parents' expectations to the letter. She attended Princeton as our father had, majored in economics, and secured a position at a prestigious consulting firm immediately after graduation. At family gatherings, my parents beamed with pride introducing Heather, the consultant, while I was simply Madison, our younger one. My entrepreneurial tendencies appeared early. At 8, my lemonade stand wasn't just a summer activity. I had calculated profit margins, experimented with different recipe formulations based on customer feedback, and expanded to 3 neighborhood locations by recruiting friends to work on commission. By high school, I was selling handmade jewelry online and making enough to fund my own savings account. It's cute that you have these little projects, Mom would say, patting my head even when I was 17. But you need to focus on activities that will get you into a good college. When I announced I wanted to study business, Dad scoffed. Business isn't a real major, Madison. Law or medicine, those are careers with a future. Despite their wishes for an Ivy League education focused on a respectable profession, I chose Boston University's business program. The day I received my acceptance letter, Mom cried, not tears of joy, but disappointment. Boston University is fine, she said, emphasis on fine in a way that clearly meant it wasn't. But I just don't understand why you wouldn't try harder for Harvard or Yale. College became my first taste of freedom. I thrived in business classes, absorbing everything from accounting principles to marketing psychology. While other students partied, I founded the Campus Tech Startup Club, organizing speaker events with local entrepreneurs. Professor James Lambert recognized my potential and became my first real mentor, the first adult who didn't treat my ambitions like a phase I would outgrow. During my junior year, I landed an internship at TechNow, a struggling software company. Within weeks, I identified critical flaws in their business model and customer acquisition strategy. I wrote a comprehensive analysis and nervously presented it to my manager. He was impressed enough to share it with the CEO, who implemented several of my recommendations. 3 months later, the company's new direction led to a 30% increase in revenue. I graduated with honors, with several prestigious corporate job offers in hand. My parents had already planned my future. Take the highest paying position, work my way up the corporate ladder, find a nice husband preferably with a law degree, and settle into a comfortable suburban existence identical to theirs. The night before graduation, Dad handed me a folder containing apartment listings in the right part of Boston and information about the 401k program at Jensen Financial, where he'd pulled some strings to get me an interview. This is your path to success, he said confidently. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. I thanked him politely, knowing I had already accepted a position at Innovate Tech, a small but promising firm where I'd be learning the industry from the ground up. When I broke the news over graduation lunch, Dad nearly choked on his salmon. You're turning down Jensen Financial for a company nobody's heard of? For half the salary. His face flushed red with anger and incomprehension. "Robert, calm down," Mom said, placing a hand on his arm while shooting me a disappointed look. Madison has always needed to learn things the hard way. My sister Heather, ever the diplomat, tried to smooth things over. Maybe this small company will be a good stepping stone. She can always apply to Jensen later when she realizes she needs stability. That was my family in a nutshell, unable to conceive that I might have a different definition of success than theirs. At Innovate Tech, I absorbed everything. I volunteered for projects outside my job description, stayed late studying market trends, and built relationships with clients and vendors. Nights and weekends were spent developing my business concept, a cybersecurity solution for small to medium businesses who couldn't afford enterprise-level protection, but were increasingly becoming targets for hackers. Every Sunday dinner at my parents' house became an interrogation about when I would find a real job. When I excitedly shared developments in my business plan, Dad would interrupt with news about Heather's latest promotion or her boyfriend from a good family. The breaking point came when I overheard Dad on the phone with his friend. Madison's still in her rebellious phase, playing entrepreneur instead of building a career. She'll grow out of it when reality hits. I was 26 years old with a solid business plan, market research, and determination. To my family, I was still a child chasing an impractical dream. The final rejection of my business plan came from a bank loan officer who barely glanced at my proposal before declining. "Perhaps get a few more years of experience," he suggested condescendingly. "Or find a male co-founder with an established track record." That night, I made a promise to myself. I would prove everyone wrong. Not just my family, but every person who had dismissed my ambitions. Success would be my vindication. With $15,000 in savings and a determination fueled by years of dismissal, I quit my job to launch Stellar Tech Solutions. When I told my parents over dinner, Mom dropped her fork with a clatter. "You did what?" Dad's voice was eerily calm, the quiet before the storm. "I started my own company," I repeated, trying to sound confident despite my racing heart. "We're going to provide affordable cybersecurity solutions for small businesses." "We?" Mom latched onto the word. "Who's we?" "Well, right now it's just me, but I'll be hiring soon." Dad laughed, not his genuine laugh, but the short, dismissive one he reserved for ideas he found absurd. "Madison, be reasonable. You'll be bankrupt within 6 months. No experience, no connections, no capital. This isn't how successful businesses start." "I have experience, I've made industry connections, and I have enough capital to get started," I countered. $15,000 isn't capital," Dad scoffed. "It's barely a down payment on a car." "I don't need your approval," I said finally. "Just your support. Or at least your respect for my decision." "Respect is earned," he replied coldly. "And this decision hasn't earned any." I left with Mom calling after me, "We're just worried about you, honey." But worry and dismissal are different emotions with the same expression in my family. My first office was a tiny space in an industrial area on the outskirts of Boston. The rent was cheap because the building had seen better days. The elevator worked only sporadically, the bathroom was down the hall. And the walls were so thin I could hear the graphic design company next door arguing about font choices. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by determination and alarming amounts of coffee. My dining table became a desk, my living room a storage area for equipment. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford as I built my website, developed marketing materials, and refined my service offerings. The first potential client meeting was with Greenfield Accounting, a local firm with 20 employees. I spent days preparing my presentation, practicing my pitch until I could recite it in my sleep. I arrived early, dressed in my only business suit, confident that my thorough preparation would win them over. Within 10 minutes, the owner stopped me mid-sentence. "This all sounds very technical, but how many clients do you currently have?" "As a new company, I'm in the process of building my client base," I answered carefully. "So none," he stated flatly. "Call me when you have a track record." I cried in my car afterward, Not from sadness, but from frustration. The classic catch, 22. Can't get clients without experience. Can't get experience without clients. That night, I rethought my entire approach. If established businesses wanted proof, I needed to find clients who couldn't afford to be so selective. I pivoted to targeting startups and very small businesses, companies with as much to prove as I had. I offered free security assessments, showing them vulnerabilities they didn't know existed. This approach worked. My first paying client was Bloombucks, a flower delivery startup with 5 employees and a website full of security holes that could have exposed customer credit card information. While they couldn't afford much, having one client led to referrals. Soon I was serving 5 small businesses, earning just enough to keep the lights on at my office, but not enough for a salary. For 3 months, I lived on ramen noodles and the cheapest groceries I could find, putting every penny back into the business. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through networking. At a local tech meetup I almost skipped because I couldn't afford the $15 entrance fee, I met Douglas Chin, the CTO of Midstate Healthcare, a regional medical provider with 30 locations. Their current security provider was charging a fortune for outdated protection. After 2 meetings and a detailed proposal, I landed my first major client, a 1-year contract worth enough to hire my first employee. Amy Wilson became my first team member. A brilliant security analyst who had been overlooked at her previous job because she didn't have a computer science degree. She believed in my vision when I could barely afford to pay her. Together in our tiny office, we developed a more comprehensive security package that became our signature offering. Just as things were looking up, disaster struck. A competitor with deeper pockets and industry connections swooped in and stole Midstate Healthcare, offering them a slightly lower rate than ours. Suddenly, our biggest client was gone. And we had 2 weeks of operating capital left. Maybe this is a sign, Mom suggested when I made the mistake of confiding in her. You gave it a good shot. There's no shame in admitting it didn't work out. Instead of giving up, I leveraged the crisis into innovation. Amy and I worked around the clock to develop a proprietary security monitoring system that could detect and neutralize threats more efficiently than anything on the market for small businesses. It was our Hail Mary pass, and it connected. When a widespread ransomware attack hit several local businesses but left our remaining clients unaffected, word spread quickly. Our phones started ringing. The Boston Business Journal ran a small feature on our preventative system. Within a month, we had signed 15 new clients and hired 2 more security specialists. 6 months later, we celebrated our first profitable quarter. I bought a bottle of champagne and 3 plastic cups, toasting with Amy and our new team members in our still cramped office with the flickering fluorescent lights. When I called my parents to share the news, Mom said, "That's nice, dear," before immediately asking if I'd met any interesting men lately. Dad's response was equally dismissive. First quarters can be misleading. Let's see if you can sustain it. My sister Heather was slightly more supportive, sending a brief congratulatory text, though it was followed by an invitation to meet her new boyfriend, an investment banker Dad had introduced her to. At a family dinner shortly after, Dad tried to introduce me to Julian Parker, the son of his golf buddy who worked in real estate development. Madison's playing at running a tech company, Dad explained to Julian, while I sat there, humiliated. It's not playing when you're profitable, I corrected him, maintaining my composure despite the anger bubbling inside. Julian looked uncomfortable. What kind of tech? Before I could answer, Dad interrupted. Nothing you would understand. Very niche. I excused myself early that night, driving home with tears of frustration blurring my vision. Why couldn't they see what I was building? Why wasn't my success on my own terms enough? The turning point in my early business journey came when I met Janet Torres, a veteran tech executive who had built and sold 2 successful security companies. She spoke at a conference where I was the youngest attendee by at least a decade. Afterward, I worked up the courage to introduce myself. Your question during the panel was the most insightful one asked, she said, surprising me. Tell me about your company. For the first time, someone with industry clout listened, really listened, to my vision. Janet became my mentor, opening doors I didn't know existed and providing guidance when I felt lost. When Stellar Tech won its first industry award for innovation, Janet attended the ceremony with me. My parents were invited but declined, citing a neighborhood barbecue they couldn't miss. Heather sent a text, "Congrats on your award thing." Standing on that small stage, accepting my first professional recognition without a single family member in attendance, I realized I was building two things, a company and the emotional resilience to succeed without the validation I'd always craved. 3 years into running Stellar Tech Solutions, we had grown to 25 employees. Our proprietary security monitoring system had evolved into a comprehensive platform that was disrupting the industry. We had moved from the tiny industrial office to a proper space in downtown Boston with windows that actually opened and chairs that didn't squeak. The series of funding round had been nerve-wracking but successful, $2 million from investors who believed in our vision and growth potential. Janet had made introductions to key venture capitalists who specialized in cybersecurity, and our numbers spoke for themselves. Our client retention rate stood at 96%, unheard of in an industry where companies regularly switched providers looking for better deals. My personal life, however, remained complicated. Despite objectively impressive accomplishments, my family still treated my company as a quirky hobby that had somehow lasted longer than expected. At my cousin Sarah's wedding, I overheard Mom telling Aunt Linda, "Madison is still doing that computer thing. We're worried about her future, you know. No benefits, no retirement plan." I wanted to interrupt and explain that I provided comprehensive benefits for all my employees, including myself, and that our company retirement plan was more generous than most corporate offerings. But I stayed silent, knowing from experience that facts didn't change perceptions in my family. Dad had developed a new habit of sending me articles about the tech bubble and stories of failed startups. Each email came with variations of the same message. Something to consider before it's too late. The Thanksgiving dinner disaster occurred shortly after we secured a contract with a regional bank, beating out competitors 3 times our size. I arrived at my parents' house buoyed by the success, finally feeling like I had something that would impress even my father. As we passed the mashed potatoes, Dad asked Heather about her recent promotion to senior consultant. She launched into a detailed explanation of her new responsibilities, the size of her team, and her company's expansion plans. My parents listened attentively, asking follow-up questions and beaming with pride. When there was finally a lull, I mentioned our new banking client. "A local bank?" Dad clarified, his tone suggesting he was unimpressed. "Regional," I corrected. "They have 63 branches across 3 states. He nodded. "Small but respectable." Of course, in banking, the real security challenges are at the national level. Actually, I began, prepared to explain how regional banks often faced more sophisticated attacks because criminals assumed their security would be weaker, but Dad had already turned to my sister's fiancé, Brad. "Brad, didn't your firm just land Northeastern National Bank as a client?" And just like that, my achievement was diminished and the conversation redirected. Later, helping Mom with dishes, I heard her on the phone with my grandmother. "No, Madison still hasn't found a nice young man. Too busy with work, I suppose." "Yes, she's still doing that startup thing." "No, I don't really understand it either." Sister's engagement to Brad, an investment banker who had my father's unqualified approval, added another layer of complexity. Brad had an MBA from Wharton and the kind of confidence that came from never having his abilities questioned. He had taken to offering me unsolicited business advice whenever we met. "You know, Madison, with your user base, you should really consider a freemium model," he stated authoritatively at Heather's engagement party, despite knowing nothing about cybersecurity or B2B sales models. "We've analyzed that approach," I replied evenly. "It doesn't work for our market segment or service type." "Trust me on this," he winked. "I've seen the numbers on these tech plays. You need scale before you need profit." I bit my tongue instead of explaining that we were already profitable and that our growth strategy was based on service quality, not the scale at all costs mentality that had driven so many startups into the ground. What my family didn't know, what I had deliberately kept from them to avoid their dismissal or attempts to help, was that Janet had nominated me for the Forbes Most Powerful Women in Tech list. The nomination alone was an honor I could hardly believe, but I knew better than to share the news. If I didn't make the list, their "I told you so" reactions would be unbearable. And if by some miracle I did make it, I wanted the validation to be complete and irrefutable before revealing it. Meanwhile, Stellar Tech was thriving. We had secured a government contract to protect municipal systems in 3 cities, beating out established competitors through a combination of innovative technology and personalized service. Our team was passionate and committed. We had created a company culture that valued both excellence and work-life balance, something I'd rarely seen in the tech world. Despite external success, I still struggled with imposter syndrome. Each achievement came with a voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my father's. "You just got lucky. The next challenge will expose your limitations." The triggering event came when TechForce, a major player in enterprise security, approached us with an acquisition offer. The number was substantial, enough that I could have walked away at 31 with financial security for life. After careful consideration and discussions with my leadership team, I declined. We had more to build, more to prove, and I wasn't ready to give up control of my vision. Somehow, Dad found out about the rejected offer. He didn't tell me how he knew, but I suspected he had connections at TechForce or their investment bank. He called me immediately. "Madison, tell me you didn't really turn down the TechForce offer," he demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I did," I confirmed. "It wasn't the right move for our company at this stage." "Not the right," he sputtered. "Do you have any idea what kind of opportunity you just threw away? This is exactly the kind of reckless decision-making that worries us." "Dad, I appreciate your concern, but this is my company and my decision. This isn't just about you," he exclaimed. "What about your employees? Their job security? What about your future? You could have been set for life." "We're doing this my way," I said firmly. A heavy silence fell before he spoke again, his voice unnervingly calm. "Your mother and I would like you to come over for dinner this Saturday. Heather and Brad will be there too. We need to have a family discussion about your situation." "My situation?" I repeated incredulously. "Your business situation," he clarified. "We're concerned. And as your family, we want to help before things get worse." I agreed to the dinner mostly out of shock. After hanging up, I realized what was happening. They were staging an intervention. As if my successful business were a destructive addiction. The week leading up to Saturday's dinner was tense. I received multiple texts from Mom asking if I had reconsidered the TechForce opportunity and whether I was open to Brad's insights about business strategy. Heather called to tell me cryptically, "Just hear them out, okay? They mean well." What none of them knew was that our company had just been valued at $20 million during confidential discussions with new investors. What none of them knew was that the Forbes list would be announced the following week. What none of them knew was that I had stopped needing their approval long ago. I just hadn't stopped wanting it. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill. As I drove to my parents' suburban home, the same house where I'd grown up, I felt a sense of dread mingled with defiance. The perfectly manicured lawn and symmetrical shrubs reflected my parents' love of order and conformity, qualities my life had deliberately lacked. I parked behind Heather's BMW and my father's Mercedes, my modest Subaru looking out of place even in the driveway. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself that I was no longer the insecure young woman desperate for validation. I was the founder and CEO of a successful tech company, regardless of whether my family recognized it. Mom opened the door before I could knock, her anxious smile failing to mask the concern in her eyes. She wore her formal cardigan, the cashmere one reserved for important occasions, another sign that this evening was no ordinary family dinner. "Madison, you're here," she said, hugging me briefly. Everyone's in the living room. I followed her through the familiar hallway lined with family photos. I noticed that my college graduation picture had been replaced with a wedding photo of Heather and Brad. The symbolism wasn't subtle. The living room had been rearranged since my last visit. The furniture formed a semicircle around the coffee table, reminiscent of how I imagined addiction interventions from TV shows. Dad sat in his leather armchair, a folder of papers on his lap. Heather and Brad occupied the love seat, both dressed as if for a business meeting. An empty spot on the sofa clearly awaited me. Madison, Dad nodded, not rising to greet me. Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice as I took my designated seat. Mom offered drinks, which everyone declined. The atmosphere was suffocating with unspoken tension. Dad cleared his throat, a sound that had signaled the beginning of serious discussions throughout my childhood. We've asked you here today because we're concerned about the direction of your enterprise. My company, I corrected. Stellar Tech Solutions. Yes, your company, he conceded. The word sounding foreign on his lips. The fact that you turned down a legitimate acquisition offer demonstrates concerning judgment. He opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be a printed PowerPoint presentation. My father, ever the investment banker, had created slides for my intervention. I've prepared some materials that outline the reality of tech startup failures, he continued, handing copies to everyone. 70% fail within 10 years. 90% of cybersecurity startups specifically fail to gain significant market share. I glanced at the document, noting that his statistics were outdated and taken out of context. Before I could point this out, he continued. Madison, we've supported your experiment for 4 years now. But refusing a legitimate exit opportunity isn't just unwise, it's reckless. Supported. I echoed, incredulous. In what way have you supported my company? Mom interjected, her voice gentle but patronizing. Emotionally, dear. We've worried about you, but respected your need to try this out. Try this out, I repeated flatly. Mom, I'm not at summer camp. I've built a multi-million-dollar company. Brad cleared his throat. Madison, speaking as someone who analyzes tech investments professionally, the market indicators suggest a correction is coming. Cybersecurity is particularly vulnerable to consolidation. I turned to him. And speaking as someone who actually runs a cybersecurity company, our market position is stronger than ever. Madison. Dad's voice hardened. I've taken the liberty of speaking with Thomas Jenkins at Fuller Investments. He paused, letting the name of his college roommate and prominent venture capitalist hang in the air. He's willing to look at your books and give an objective assessment of your company's viability. The realization that my father had been discussing my business behind my back made my blood run cold. You did what? It's a favor, he insisted. Tom specializes in distressed tech assets. We are not distressed, I stated through gritted teeth. Honey, Mom leaned forward, placing her hand on mine. We're just worried about your future. If this doesn't work out, and statistically, it might not, you'll have a gap in your resume. Have you considered what comes next? What comes next is continued growth, I replied, pulling my hand away. There's no shame in accepting help. Mom continued. If you need to regroup, your old room is always available. The suggestion that I might move back home at 31 after building a successful company was so absurd I almost laughed. Heather had remained suspiciously quiet, absorbed in her phone rather than participating in the ambush. Suddenly, she gasped loudly, her eyes widening as she stared at her screen. What is it? Mom asked, startled by the interruption. Heather looked up, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. Why is your face on Forbes' most powerful women in tech list? She asked, turning her phone to show a notification from the Forbes app. The room fell silent. Dad's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Mom froze mid-gesture. Brad lunged across to look at Heather's phone. Let me see that, Dad finally managed, taking the phone from Heather. He read aloud, his voice increasingly strained. Madison Campbell, founder and CEO of Stellar Tech Solutions, has revolutionized cybersecurity access for small and medium businesses. At 31. She's the youngest entrant on this year's list, with her company recently valued at $20 million. He trailed off, looking up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and bewilderment. $20 million? Mom whispered. Your company is worth $20 million? As of last month's valuation, yes, I confirmed, maintaining my composure despite the emotional turmoil inside. Brad had pulled out his own phone and was frantically Googling my company. There's a whole profile, he reported, scrolling rapidly. Client testimonials, industry analysis. How did we not know about this? You never asked, I said simply. You were too busy planning my intervention to consider that I might actually be succeeding. Dad was still holding Heather's phone, staring at my photograph on the Forbes list as if trying to reconcile it with the daughter he thought he knew. The photo shoot was last month, I added. They swore me to secrecy until the official announcement. But the TechForce offer, Dad stammered. If you're doing this well, why would you turn it down? Because I'm building something valuable on my own terms, I explained. Something I believe in. The same reason I've made every decision you've questioned since I started this company. The painful silence that followed was broken by Mom's small voice. We were just trying to help. I looked at my family, my accomplished, well-meaning, completely misguided family, and felt a strange mixture of vindication, hurt, and pity. I know you think you were, I said finally, standing up and gathering my purse. But real help starts with respect. And none of you have respected me enough to believe I might succeed without your intervention. I walked to the door, then turned back. The Forbes issue comes out next Tuesday. I'd be happy to sign a copy for each of you. With that parting comment, petty, perhaps, but deeply satisfying, I walked out of my childhood home, leaving my family in stunned silence with their now useless intervention materials scattered across the coffee table. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights and conflicting emotions. Vindication warred with hurt, triumph with a lingering sense of loss. I had finally received the validation I'd unconsciously craved for years, not just from Forbes, but reflected in my family's shocked faces. Yet the victory felt hollow. Why had it taken external recognition for them to take me seriously? Once home, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto my sofa, letting tears flow freely for the first time in months. They weren't tears of sadness exactly, more a release of years of pent-up frustration and the complicated relief of finally being seen. My phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications. I ignored most of them but saw Heather's name appear multiple times. Finally, around midnight, I answered her call. Madison, she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I don't even know what to say. Congratulations would be a start, I replied, not making it easy for her. Congratulations, she said immediately. But also, I'm sorry. We've been horrible. Not horrible, I softened slightly, just dismissive. Which is horrible when it's your life's work, she acknowledged. I knew you were doing well, but I had no idea. Forbes, Madison. Forbes. I didn't tell anyone except my executive team, I explained. I was nominated months ago but never expected to actually make the list. Why didn't you at least tell me? I hesitated before answering honestly. Because I was tired of having my achievements minimized. If I didn't make the list, I didn't want to hear, well, it was a long shot anyway. And if I did make it? You wanted to see our faces, she finished for me. Something like that, I admitted. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? Heather asked. I want to hear about your company. The real story, not Dad's interpretation. I agreed, feeling a small bridge forming where there had previously been a chasm. For the next 2 weeks, I deliberately ignored my parents' attempts to contact me. Dad left voicemails that evolved from defensive, "We were just trying to help," to somewhat conciliatory, "Perhaps we misunderstood the situation." Mom sent texts ranging from guilt-inducing, "Your father hasn't been sleeping," to awkwardly proud, "I told Mrs. Peterson from church about your Forbes thing." I needed space to process my feelings without their input. Meanwhile, the Forbes recognition transformed my professional life. The morning after the official announcement, I arrived at our office to find it filled with flowers from clients, partners, and even competitors. My inbox overflowed with congratulatory messages and partnership inquiries. Janet called first thing. "I told you," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "You belong on that list." The Forbes photoshoot had been surreal: professional makeup, lighting crews, and a photographer who had shot celebrities and world leaders. They positioned me in our office, surrounded by monitors displaying our security software interface. The stylist had suggested a conservative blazer, but I opted for the bright blue dress that made me feel confident. "This is me," I had insisted, "not some corporate version of me." My team's reaction to the recognition meant more than any external validation. We closed the office early for a champagne celebration, and I made sure to acknowledge that the achievement belonged to all of us. Amy, my first employee who had taken a chance on an unproven company, gave a tearful toast that left us all emotional. "To the woman who saw potential where others saw risk," she said, raising her glass, "and who taught us all to believe in our own capabilities." While my professional confidence soared, my personal wound remained raw. I finally agreed to speak with my father after he sent an email with the subject line, "I was wrong." The phone conversation was strained. Dad had never been good at admitting mistakes, and his attempt now was awkward at best. "The Forbes recognition is quite impressive," he began formally, as if discussing a stranger's achievement. "Thank you," I replied, not making it easier for him. "I may have underestimated the viability of your business model," he continued. "You definitely did." A long pause followed before he added, "Your mother and I would like to take you to dinner to celebrate properly." I declined, explaining that I wasn't ready for another family dinner. The hurt was still too fresh. "I need some time, Dad." What happened at that intervention? It was the culmination of years of dismissal. That doesn't heal overnight, even with a Forbes feature. He seemed genuinely surprised by this response, as if the external validation should have erased all previous wounds. This reaction only confirmed that he still didn't understand. Coffee with Heather proved more productive. Meeting at a cafe halfway between our offices, she arrived with a printed copy of my Forbes profile, asking me to sign it, half joking but also sincere. "I've been thinking about everything," she said after we ordered. "How different our paths have been, how differently Mom and Dad treated us." "You followed their script," I pointed out. "I rejected it." "I know," she nodded. "But I never stood up for you. I bought into their narrative that you were being reckless when you were actually being brave." This admission from my always perfect sister meant more than I expected. We spent 2 hours really talking, about our childhood, our different approaches to life, and how our parents' expectations had shaped us both, just in different ways. "Brad was insufferable after your intervention exit," she confided with a small smile. "He keeps saying he knew you were undervalued in the market, but no one would listen." We both laughed, the tension between us easing for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. During this period of family recalibration, I also started working with Dr. Melissa Chin, a therapist specializing in high-achieving women from traditional families. Our sessions helped me understand that my drive for success was partially fueled by a desire for parental approval I might never fully receive. "Your parents' inability to validate your choices reflects their limitations, not yours," Dr. Chin pointed out. "The question is, can you accept their limitations while still maintaining a relationship?" This question haunted me as I prepared for my first public speaking engagement following the Forbes recognition, a keynote address at the Northeast Technology Summit. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd become an overnight success after years of methodical work. Standing backstage before my presentation, I was surprised to receive a text from Dad. "Your mother and I are in the audience. Regardless of what happens next, we're proud of you." I scanned the crowd as I took the stage and spotted them in the middle section, Mom nervously clutching her purse, Dad sitting ramrod straight in his suit. They had come without telling me. a small gesture that spoke volumes about their efforts to understand my world. The speech was a success, garnering a standing ovation and numerous requests for meetings afterward. When I finally made my way to my parents, Mom hugged me tightly. "I didn't understand half of what you said," she admitted, but everyone was so impressed. Dad extended his hand formally, then seemed to think better of it and pulled me into an awkward hug. "That was eye-opening," he said, genuine respect in his voice for perhaps the first time. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning, a recognition that we might build something new from the rubble of old expectations. The day the Forbes issue hit newsstands, our office received a delivery, a framed copy of the magazine cover, sent by Janet with a note that read simply, "First of many. Never doubt yourself again." I hung it in our reception area, not as a boast, but as a reminder to every employee that their work was being recognized at the highest levels. Media attention followed quickly. Local business publications requested interviews. Industry blogs analyzed our business model. The Boston Business Journal ran a feature titled "Hometown Disruptor," complete with childhood photos my mother had enthusiastically provided without my knowledge. "You always looked so serious in your school pictures," the journalist commented during our interview. "Like you were already planning world domination." "Not domination," I corrected. "Transformation." The increased visibility brought new opportunities and challenges. Investors who had previously ignored my emails now sought meetings. Potential clients reached out directly. Competitors suddenly suggested exploratory partnership discussions. My calendar filled with appointments that would have been impossible to secure months earlier. We leveraged the momentum to expand internationally, establishing our first overseas office in London to serve European clients. The Series B funding round exceeded expectations, securing $50 million at a valuation that made the previously impressive $20 million seem modest. Through it all, I remained focused on our core mission, making enterprise-level cybersecurity accessible to businesses of all sizes. When a prominent venture capitalist suggested pivoting to focus exclusively on larger, more profitable clients, I declined. "The small businesses are why we exist," I explained. "They're not a stepping stone, they're our purpose." My new executive team, now including a CFO, CTO, and COO, supported this vision, even when it meant slower growth than some investors preferred. We relocated to a headquarters that accommodated our 100-plus employees while maintaining the collaborative culture we'd established when there were just 5 of us. At home, my parents had transformed the Forbes magazine into something of a family relic. Mom mentioned during a phone call that Dad had purchased 5 copies, keeping one in his office and proudly showing it to colleagues and clients. "Your father tells everyone his daughter is in Forbes," she reported with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. "Even the checkout clerk at Whole Foods knows about it now." The family dinner scene shifted dramatically. At Thanksgiving, 6 months after the intervention turned revelation, the dynamic was noticeably different. Dad asked detailed questions about our European expansion. Mom mentioned a cybersecurity segment she'd seen on the morning news, wondering if it affected our business. Most surprisingly, Heather announced she was leaving her consulting position to join a tech startup. "I've been watching how fulfilling Madison's work is," she explained, while Dad looked momentarily alarmed before carefully composing his features. "That sounds interesting," he managed, glancing at me. "I'm sure Madison can offer some guidance about the startup world." This small acknowledgement of my expertise represented massive growth from the man who had once dismissed my business as playing entrepreneur. The most significant family development came when Heather approached me with an unexpected proposal. After several months at her tech startup, she had discovered a passion for operations and organizational efficiency. "I've been thinking," she said during one of our now regular sister lunches. "Stellar Tech is growing so quickly. Have you considered bringing on a dedicated COO?" I studied her face, understanding the unasked question. "Are you suggesting yourself?" She nodded nervously. "I know it sounds crazy, We've always been on such different paths, and I'm not pretending to have your technical knowledge. But operations, scaling, organizational development, that's what I've been trained to do. The idea of working with my sister, the same sister who had sat silently through my family intervention less than a year ago, seemed fraught with potential complications. Yet, something about it felt right, a chance to rebuild our relationship on new, equal footing. After thorough interviews with my executive team and board, I insisted on no special treatment. Heather joined Stellar Tech as Chief Operating Officer. Her corporate background complemented my entrepreneurial approach, creating a balance that benefited the company. Working together revealed dimensions of Heather I'd never appreciated: her meticulous attention to detail, her talent for diplomatic problem-solving, her genuine respect for the company I'd built. In turn, she saw my creative vision and strategic thinking in action daily. I had no idea, she confessed after her first month. The complexity of what you've been managing all these years. I'm kind of in awe. My relationship with my parents evolved more gradually. Mom began sending articles about successful women entrepreneurs with notes like "reminded me of you" or "thought this might interest you." Small gestures, but meaningful ones. Dad's transformation was more surprising. At a family dinner celebrating Heather's new position, he asked about our approach to international regulatory compliance, a legitimate business question rather than a disguised criticism. After dinner, he invited me into his home office, where I noticed the Forbes issue prominently displayed beside family photos. "I want to show you something," he said, unlocking a drawer and removing a faded folder. Inside was a business plan dated 1983, 3 years before I was born. "You tried to start a business?" I asked, stunned as I scanned the document outlining a financial services company catering to middle-income families. "Investment banking was my backup plan," he admitted. "This was my dream." "What happened?" His expression tightened. "I secured initial funding, left my job, signed an office lease. 3 months in, my partners pulled out unexpectedly. The bank called our loan. I lost everything, including our down payment for a house." "I had no idea," I said softly. "Your mother was pregnant with Heather. I needed security, stability. I took the first solid job offer and never looked back." He paused, his voice dropping. Or at least, I tried not to. The revelation transformed my understanding of my father. His opposition to my entrepreneurial path wasn't just stubbornness, it was fear born from his own painful experience. "When you started your company," he continued, "all I could see was history repeating itself. I was trying to protect you from what I went through. By discouraging me at every turn, I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. By pushing you toward what I knew was safe," he corrected. "I was wrong, Madison. Your courage to persist despite everyone's doubts, including mine, that's something I couldn't do." The conversation didn't instantly heal decades of misunderstanding, but it provided context I'd never had before. My father's skepticism came not from lack of faith in me specifically, but from his own unresolved pain. This new understanding allowed me to view my family's behavior through a more compassionate lens. Their fear for me had been expressed as dismissal, but its root was concern, however misguided. The real test came when I was invited to deliver a keynote address at the National Cybersecurity Conference, the most prestigious speaking engagement of my career. I hesitantly invited my parents, expecting them to decline. "We'll be there," Dad responded immediately. "Send the details." Standing at the podium before thousands of industry leaders, I spotted my parents in the 10th row. Dad listened intently, nodding occasionally. Mom beamed with undisguised pride. They gave a standing ovation before anyone else in their section. Afterward, surrounded by attendees wanting to connect, I saw Dad waiting patiently at the edge of the crowd. When I finally reached him, he shook my hand formally. "That was extraordinary," he said, emotion making his voice unsteady. "I have never been prouder to be your father." The words I had waited a lifetime to hear. Later that evening, Mom asked questions about my presentation, genuine questions that showed she had been listening and trying to understand. She still didn't grasp the technical details, but her effort to engage with my world represented tremendous growth. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner," she said quietly as we parted. "The remarkable woman you've become." As my company continued to thrive, I found myself increasingly comfortable with who I was professionally and personally. The desperate need for family validation had diminished as I built confidence in my own judgment and surrounded myself with people who recognized my value without requiring external proof. The most unexpected development came during a routine check-in with Janet, who had become not just a mentor but a friend. "Have you considered mentoring young entrepreneurs yourself?" she asked. "Particularly young women facing the same barriers you did?" The suggestion resonated deeply. I established a mentorship program at Stellar Tech, providing guidance and small seed investments to women launching tech businesses. Many of them shared stories of family skepticism painfully similar to my own. "My father thinks tech is for guys," one young founder told me. "He keeps asking when I'm going to get a real job." "Bring him to my office sometime," I offered with a smile. I know exactly how that feels. Personal growth paralleled professional success in unexpected ways. I began dating Eric, a children's book author who found my business accomplishments fascinating rather than intimidating. His creative perspective balanced my analytical nature, and his supportive attitude toward my career was refreshingly uncomplicated. "Your ambition is one of your most attractive qualities," he told me after witnessing a tense negotiation I handled. "It's not something to apologize for or hide." This simple affirmation highlighted how accustomed I'd become to defending my professional passion, even in personal relationships. The family dynamics continued evolving. Dad asked for my input on his investment portfolio, a small request that represented enormous respect coming from him. Mom stopped asking when I would settle down and instead inquired about business developments with genuine interest. Working with Heather strengthened our relationship beyond anything I could have imagined. The competitive tension that had defined our childhood transformed into collaborative respect. We balanced each other's strengths and weaknesses, creating a partnership that benefited both us and the company. "We wasted so many years seeing each other as rivals," she reflected during a late-night strategy session. "When we actually make a pretty great team." The journey from the family intervention to industry recognition had been painful but ultimately transformative, not just for my career, but for my understanding of myself and my family. Success hadn't healed the wounds of years of dismissal. Only honest communication and mutual respect could do that. But success had given me the confidence to establish boundaries and expectations for how I deserved to be treated. 1 year after the Forbes recognition, Dad called with an unexpected question. "I'm mentoring a young analyst who's considering leaving to start his own firm. Would you be willing to speak with him? Your perspective would be valuable." My father was asking for my business advice, a request that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. "I'd be happy to," I replied, recognizing the significance of the moment. "Thank you," he said, then added quietly, "It seems I still have things to learn about business after all." It wasn't an explicit apology for years of dismissal, but from my father. It was an extraordinary acknowledgement. Sometimes growth comes not in grand gestures, but in small moments of humility that would once have been impossible. A little over a year after my family's intervention turned revelation, Stellar Tech Solutions celebrated its 5th anniversary. We hosted a gala event in our expanded headquarters, bringing together employees, clients, investors, and partners who had supported our journey. Standing at the podium addressing the gathered crowd, I reflected on the distance traveled, not just as a company but personally. 5 years earlier, I had been working alone in a tiny office, eating ramen to make payroll, while my family waited for my inevitable failure. Now I led a company valued at over $100 million with international operations and a team of exceptional professionals who believed in our mission. Janet, my first true mentor, introduced me at the event with words that brought tears to my eyes. "Some leaders are born from privilege and opportunity. Others forge themselves through fire." Madison Campbell built this company despite obstacles that would have deterred most people, proving that sometimes the most powerful fuel for success is having something to prove. I scanned the audience as I began my speech, finding my parents seated at a table near the front. Mom wore a new dress for the occasion, looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed by the sophisticated gathering. Dad sat with uncharacteristically relaxed posture, nodding encouragingly as our eyes met. The healing journey from pain to acceptance had been neither quick nor linear. For months after the Forbes revelation, I had clung to my hurt, using it as a shield against further disappointment. The vindication of public recognition had initially hardened rather than healed the wound of years of dismissal. The profound lesson emerged gradually. External validation, even from Forbes magazine, couldn't heal what needed internal resolution. Success had changed how others saw me, but the deeper transformation came from changing how I saw myself and my relationship with my family. The greatest challenge in building this company wasn't securing funding or developing technology, I told the anniversary gathering. It was learning to believe in my vision when few others did. To trust my judgment when conventional wisdom pointed elsewhere. To define success on my own terms. I had spent years seeking my parents' approval, measuring my worth through their recognition. The painful irony was that only when I stopped needing their validation did our relationship begin to heal. Dad had taken a significant step by asking for my business advice for his mentee. Even more meaningful was finding the Forbes issue prominently displayed in their living room when I visited, not hidden away as an anomaly but celebrated as part of who I was. Madison. Mom had said during that visit, Jennifer from my book club asked if you might speak to her daughter who's interested in computer science. I told her you're very busy, but perhaps. The fact that my mother now saw me as a potential role model represented extraordinary evolution from the woman who had once suggested I move back home when my business inevitably failed. The new family dynamic wasn't perfect. Dad occasionally slipped into his old habit of offering unsolicited advice before catching himself. Mom's still worried about my work-life balance more than she would have for a son. But there was a foundation of mutual respect that had previously been absent. My sister Heather had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation. As our company's COO, she had embraced the startup world she'd once viewed with skepticism, thriving in an environment free from our parents' expectations. Our working relationship had deepened our personal bond, replacing decades of comparison and competition with collaboration and appreciation for our different strengths. The family dinner scene from the intervention still plays in my mind sometimes. Heather confessed during a rare quiet moment in our hectic schedule. The shock on Dad's face when he saw the Forbes notification. I'd never seen him speechless before. It shouldn't have taken Forbes to make him believe in me, I noted, the old hurt briefly resurfacing. No, she agreed. But maybe he needed that shock to recognize his own blind spot. The company continued to expand, but I had learned to balance ambition with personal well-being. The workaholic who had once slept on an office couch now maintained boundaries between professional achievement and personal fulfillment. My relationship with Eric progressed naturally, free from the family pressure that had complicated previous romances. The mentorship program for female entrepreneurs became one of my most rewarding initiatives. Creating opportunities for young women facing the skepticism I had encountered gave purpose beyond profit to our success. We established a scholarship fund for business students from unsupportive backgrounds, offering not just financial assistance, but a community that believed in their potential. At a recent family dinner, now a monthly tradition rather than an occasion for dread, I watched my parents interact with Eric, discussing his latest children's book with genuine interest. Dad asked thoughtful questions about the publishing industry without offering corrective advice. Mom refrained from her usual hints about wedding plans. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside. I found this while cleaning out some old files, he said, handing me a yellowed newspaper clipping from my high school years featuring my regional win for a business plan competition. I saved it back then but never told you. Perhaps part of me always knew you had something special, even when I was too afraid to acknowledge it. This small confession encapsulated our journey, the long road from dismissal to recognition, from hurt to healing. Success hadn't changed who I was, it had revealed who I had been all along. To myself and eventually to my family. As I conclude this story, I'm reminded that true success isn't measured by valuations or magazine covers. It's found in the freedom to define your own path, to release the need for external validation, and to forge relationships based on authentic acceptance rather than conditional approval. Have you ever had your achievements dismissed by those whose support you most wanted? Did external recognition finally change their perspective, or did you learn to find validation within yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their vision deserves to be pursued, even when others don't yet see it. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the people who don't initially believe in your dreams are the ones most surprised by your success.